Hey there, it is me. This is Larry Douglas. I had posted earlier that I would be doing a kind of a live feed tonight for a little while on the subject of forgiveness. If you caught the one the other day, uh, the uh, the subject was forgiveness. What I wanted to try to focus in on tonight for just a few minutes is the subject of self forgiveness. And so if you're here, you can give me a shout out and say, hi, I'm in my office here at the church, and I'm hoping this is helpful. Let me go back to what I did the other day, and just real brief, because I want to get to self forgiveness, and that's where we're going to focus for just a few minutes. This is not preaching, it's not Bible teaching, it's just me really having a conversation with you. The other day when I did the first one on forgiveness, there were four things I highlighted because I think forgiveness sometimes is a misunderstood concept. So there are four things I mentioned just briefly here before we move on. Forgiveness actually needs to recognize the offense. Forgiveness is not pretending something didn't happen. It isn't a fantasy. It isn't stuffing it. Actually, to forgive something, you have to recognize the specific offense that took place. The second thing that it is, the ability to forgive is somewhat predicated on your awareness that you also have done things. Maybe not the same thing that you're trying to forgive, but when you realize that you too have made mistakes, you've made errors, you've hurt people's feelings, you've sinned, what happens is when you go to confront someone else about the hurt that you have sustained, and you are aware of your own, what happens is it becomes a peer relationship. You may not have done the same thing, but when you go to someone about a specific thing, which is what forgiveness is, it requires a specific nature. The second thing is that it realizes I have faults too, and that allows you to have a very peer-like conversation about the offense. Instead of somebody coming to someone else who's superior or acting superior, it's kind of an act of humility to say, that hurt, what you said, what you did. But what happens is when you are aware of your own faults, then you can approach someone else about the hurt that you have sustained. So that was the second thing. The third thing is forgiveness as an act is releasing somebody from a debt. That's what it is. So forgiveness recognizes there's a specific, it realizes that I too am not perfect. The act of forgiveness is actually the act of releasing somebody from a debt. It's much better than holding someone emotional hostage. The fourth thing, and this is where we got to the other day, and these are brief videos and these are live, and this is just me talking to you about forgiveness. From the other day, the fourth thing that forgiveness does, and this is what is personally for you life transforming, is forgiveness recreates relationships. That's what forgiveness does. It says we have a adversarial relationship, we have a wounded relationship, but forgiveness says I don't want this. I want something else. And what forgiveness allows you to do is to recreate a relationship. And it is, I'm not saying it's easy, but it's very possible that you can forgive someone who has hurt you and isn't even sorry. I know it's easier if they are sorry and they said, hey, I realized what I did there was hurtful, what I said was bitter, whatever it happens to be. But it's also very possible for you to be freed from the anxiety and the worry of it all, the frustration of it all, when you have said in your mind, I'm going to forgive this person even though they're not repentant. Because what forgiveness ultimately does is recreate the relationship from your point of view, even if they haven't repented, even if they haven't said, I'm sorry. And I think that's where we left off the other day, is when you as a person realize that you have been sent by God to offer forgiveness. There's nothing that you ever do that's more Christ-like than offering forgiveness. So I'm going to try to wave to a couple people, and then I'm going to move on, because what I wanted to try to talk about tonight was self-forgiveness. If you want to, you could go back and find the one. Actually, I think I made it yesterday. It's on forgiveness. I would take a look at that. It's on my page. It's also on the chapel page. Now, what I wanted to talk about, and this is just very brief, I don't think I have all the answers, but I really, really want to help some of you who are in anguish and you are feeling hurt and you have been struggling with the area of self-forgiveness. Man, I can't even tell you how many people have told me they partied out, they were terrible parents, they drank the family fortune away, they just, all kinds of things that eat us up from the inside. So what I'm going to zero in on is very specific, and I have 4 particulars for you. Of the 4, you may only find one that fits you, and that's fine. It's kind of grocery shopping here. I'm going to offer you 4 thoughts about self-forgiveness. It's not psychobabble, it's just very practical talk, me talking to you about self-forgiveness. So, there are 4 things that self-forgiveness, and really effective self-forgiveness, is predicated on. The first of which is self-awareness. For you to experience self-forgiveness, the forgiveness of God, and your ability to move past your own mistakes, and that's really, it's very crippling. It's emotionally crippling. It's relationally crippling when you have done something wrong and it just haunts you. And man, sometimes things we've done, they just seem to haunt us, and they can follow you to the grave, which is why I'm saying why you need to, number 1, practice self-awareness. What do I mean? First, self-awareness is your ability to locate the specific thing that you think you did or that you actually did. It's not good enough, and it's not helpful enough to say, hey, I guess I'm just not perfect, or everybody makes mistakes, or you could say things like, hey, I'm just human, and that all of that is true. But if there is something festering, you told a lie, you had an affair, you went bankrupt, you took credit for what somebody did, you cheated on your test, any number of other things, you thought you were a horrible mom or dad, or you wish there were certain chapters in your life that you could replay, but you can't. The very first thing you need to do to experience real freedom, and I am talking about genuine emotional, relational, spiritual freedom, is you have to become self-aware, and by that, you have to locate the specific thing that's bothering you, because otherwise, if you don't, the one thing can attach itself to everything else, and you feel like you are a failure. And this is where I'm leaning into this, and you must believe me when I tell you that mistakes are not an identity. That's got to be first in your mind. Mistakes are not an identity. They are feedback, but you need to listen to the feedback. I think I told you the other day, it's very wise to listen to your own reruns. And I say that because if something is replaying emotionally, and even in your own personal history, you probably ought to find out what that is and locate the specific nature of the thing, the incident, the sin, the habit that is bothering you. Because you can't make any problems as long as it's just sort of a wandering generality. Self-awareness. 2, to experience self-forgiveness, you need to, number 2, have self-reflection. And I'm being very careful here. In my mind, the difference between self-awareness and self-reflection is self-awareness is locating the what you did, what happened, and self-reflection is examining the why of it. If you are, I don't want to hurt your feelings. I really don't. I want to help you over the problem. But if you have a problem with lying or exaggerating, your temper, taking credit for things that you didn't do, gossip, whatever it happens to be, whatever the thing is that you are doing and you just can't seem to get past it, even self-pity can turn into a sin. Being self-aware helps you locate the specific. Self-reflection helps you to figure out why. So, get a journal, a piece of paper, anything's better than nothing, a pen, a pencil, and a napkin, a notebook, whatever, and ask yourself, if something that happened in the past was a major event in your life, why did it happen? Why did you do that? As opposed to saying, I'm just that way, nobody's perfect. Well, that sounds like you don't care. That sounds like you don't really care whether or not you figure out what went wrong. So self-awareness says, I want to locate why I'm feeling this way. I want to know what the specific thing is that I'm feeling. Personally, for me, sometimes I'm suspicious. I could say that everybody does that, but sometimes I find myself going, I wonder what they're up to. I'm aware of that, but then I got to figure out why that is. And you do too. I am a real believer that our lives are entirely too busy. We live in a fast food, Jiffy Lube, instant access, microwave popcorn, everything's too fast, and the idea of being reflective and a little introspective in a positive way, it is getting lost in the busyness and the activity of our life. So self-forgiveness says I've got to locate what it is that's bugging me, and two, I need to be self-reflective enough to figure out why I did that, or why I'm doing that. In fact, I had a couple things before I move on to number 3, and this is where it's going to get maybe a little intense here for you. You need to ask yourself: did you actually do wrong, or is somebody erroneously making you feel wrong? Is somebody imposing their guilt on you, or do you actually have some culpability for attitude or actions? I don't know. That's kind of up to you to decide. But we need to locate what it is, why it is, and then 3, and this is where we are going to do some. This is a little harder, but it's good. This is really good. I think meaty, emotional, theological, practical help. 3. For you to experience self-forgiveness, you have to experience and be learning true self-identity. If what you are doing does not reflect who you want to be, that is because you are not living out the reality of who God meant you to be. So, yeah, sometimes I'm suspicious. And sometimes I'm not the best person to be with in a traffic jam when there are crazy drivers, and once in a while I am the crazy driver. So I got it. So I can't just say, nobody's perfect. This just doesn't really help much. True self-identity is where you begin to feel and find and experience the roots of self-forgiveness. A false self, a false set of philosophical approaches says, I needed to lie to get what I wanted. I needed to steal to get what I wanted. I needed to gossip about those people to teach them a lesson. Whatever the bad habit is, or the bad event in your life, once you discover why you did that, you may be on to number 3, which is true self-identity. Who is it that God created me to be? Because in the reality of becoming... My phone went off. In discovering who God created you to be, you will find the power to overcome the things that haunt you from the past. I have had people over the years tell me they had committed sexual affairs. I have had people tell me they did all kinds of things. Some of them very tearfully. And this is where it's going to be raw. I'm afraid I will lose some of you here, and I don't want to. I've had people tell me they hated their wife, that they hated their husband, and they just could not overcome the bitterness and the frustration. On occasion, I've had people say, I am so frustrated with parenting, sometimes I feel like I hate my own kids. I think what that means is I hate the way I'm feeling about my kids. I'm not sure people actually hate their kids as much as they hate the impatience that they feel, the lack of tolerance for certain behavior that is reoccurring. In any case, I want to encourage you. Self-awareness is locating the specific. Self-reflection is locating the why. Discovering your true self-identity is discovering who is it I want to be. If I don't want to be the person that I was in the past, if I don't want to be the person that I'm acting like currently at work or at home or even in church, wherever it is, who is it that I do want to be? And I believe that is probably where a great deal of marital struggle, personal struggle takes place, is that we haven't really discovered who we are. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I had thought about doing a separate video on just true self-identity. Who are you? How do you discover who you are? And I thought that was a little bit more than I wanted to cover tonight. What I do want you to know is that you are not a cosmic accident. You weren't born at the better end of the gene pool. You have a life that was sovereignly declared by God, sovereignly designed by God. God did not design you to be a failure. He knows that you and I come with that equipment to make mistakes. But He also knows who He wants us to be. And as long as you are separated from Him, you will never discover who you are meant to be. But I want to be honest with you. If you're an atheist and you're listening, or you're unchurched and you're listening, if you are gay or you're bisexual or you're listening, I still think there's something here for you. I do. I still think there's something here for you. Because no matter where you are in life, no matter who you are in life, there is a sense that you and I are fellow human beings. Whatever differences we may have, culturally, spiritually, whatever that happens to look like, you and I share the same planet. And we share the same Creator. Maybe we have different views of that. We are fellow humans. And I believe if you are struggling with the past, the past can be a merciless, emotional Goliath. The past that haunts you. The past that reminds you of all those times you did something. Or the one time that you just really blew it and nobody knows. In fact, I may be talking to someone, and maybe you've done something in the past when you were younger, and maybe even recently, and nobody knows but you, and you dread the feeling. You're aware that God is forgiving, but you just can't get past it. This is where we make progress tonight, sitting right here listening to this live feed. First, you have to be self-aware enough to identify what it is that's bothering you, and be brave enough to look at it. Don't fear the thing that you're running from. Look at it. Secondly, you need to be self-reflective enough to try to figure out what need are you trying to meet, or what need were you trying to meet when you entered into the bad behavior that you did one time or two times, or a reoccurring thing in your life. What is the thing? What is the need you are trying to meet? Let me give you a couple of examples. Lying is a demonstration of a lack of faith. It's a clear demonstration of a lack of faith. Well, how can that be? Lying says, I don't believe that God will take care of me if I tell the truth. You with me there? That's why people lie, because they don't have enough faith to believe that if I tell the truth, God will take care of me. It also may be ingrained in the personality. I think I told you the other day that Ecclesiastes 8:8 says, like a soldier in wartime, sin will not release those who practice it. You actually may be, part of who your identity is now may have been shaped in your childhood. It may be shaped by your personality. It may be shaped, you may have been shaped, and probably were, by your social surroundings, your education, your cultural upbringing, your church upbringing, your lack of church upbringing, whatever. You're kind of a collection of a lot of things in life. What I do know is that most of the bad behavior in our life is actually rooted in us trying to have some legitimate need met. You may not believe in sin, and that's fine. I still want you to keep listening. Sin is the flesh's attempt to meet its needs apart from God. So if you don't use the word sin and you just use the word bad behavior or continual mistakes, whatever that is, it is the flesh's attempt to meet its needs apart from God, and it's the flesh's attempts to meet its needs apart from a proper identity. If you knew who you really were, and you had confidence in who you were and clarity in who you were, you probably wouldn't resort to acting like somebody that you're not, which is what bad behavior kind of is. I understand we have a sin nature. Some don't believe that. I do. But if you're listening and you don't, that's fine. We can still keep talking here. I just know that true self-identity, you discovering who you are and who you aren't, releases you from behavior that ends up in you trying to act like somebody that you are not. And you don't want to do that. And I think that's a lot of where our trouble is. We simply haven't come to believe and accept even the simplicity of who we are. But in accepting who you are, your own personality, not being lost in somebody else's, you growing in who you are meant to be. And I honestly believe that only God can teach you that correctly over a period of time. It helps you to see that the things that you're looking to overcome and the things that you need to be forgiven of are one thing, but discovering why you did it and overcoming it is a different question. Fourth, self-awareness is identifying, locating the specific issue I need to identify. Self-reflection is discovering why. True self-identity is the foundation of creating better life, better habits, better character for who you want to be. And that's what I'm calling true self-identity. If you're practicing a lifestyle or did practice a lifestyle that doesn't reflect who you want to be, then that leads us to number 4, which is self-direction. This may fit some of you and may not. But before I get to number 4, I want to go back to the first video, because all of this is about forgiveness. Forgiveness recognizes the offense. Forgiveness requires me to say, I'm aware of my own faults before I confront you with yours. Forgiveness releases the debtor from the debt, that's third, and forgiveness recreates the relationship, which brings us to self-direction. For you to experience self-forgiveness, it means you've got to do something more than say, okay, I made that mistake, I'm never going to do that again. What happens if you do it again? I want to encourage you to think about the following, having to do with 4, self-direction. I believe a great deal of what we struggle with emotionally, our inability to find the words that we want to express, the ability to to locate the actual emotion that we feel. I do not believe that it's a question of your intelligence. It's more a question of practice. I think a great deal of what we wrestle with are weaknesses because we haven't garnered a strength that is greater than the weakness that besets us. And even if the weakness is to being plagued by the mistake in the past, and that's what that is. If you are being plagued by a mistake or mistakes you made in the past, that means there's another identity that hasn't quite come to fulfillment in your life. Because you made a mistake doesn't mean you are a mistake. Mistakes, like I said, they're just feedback. They are not an identity. But it's easy when you make, depending on the mistake, if they're intense enough for you to feel that is your identity. I guess I'm a loser. I guess I'm a failure. I guess I'll never get it right. That actually is symptomatic. That's problematic and it's symptomatic. But what it tells me is that you haven't grown a strength in mind and emotion that's greater than the weakness that's besetting you. And that means there's hope. There's real hope. This isn't just mindless optimism on my part. You do this all the time. If you had a misunderstanding of something as simple as a cake recipe, you would look it up and figure out how to correct it. I mean, you do this all the time with mechanics. We do this all the time at work. We find something that's wrong and then we fix it. A process, software, interpersonal relationships, whatever it is that we do in life, medically, we do it all the time. And then when it comes to us, the same skills we use in other things we don't use personally. So forgiveness means that you have understood that God has released you from the debt you created. Let me say that again. Forgiveness, for it to be transformational, means that you are coming into a deeper realization that God has released you from the debt you created. If God has released you, why haven't you released yourself? If God himself, and I don't know where you are with the Lord, and this is just me talking to you, we're having a conversation here. If the Father, who is holy and righteous, and you came into a forgiving relationship with him as a child of God, if he has released you, why haven't you released yourself? Does that sound arrogant? Does that sound pompous? Well, it's not meant to be. That is why I'm doing this video about self-forgiveness. Self-forgiveness is allowing yourself to realize that you are no longer under not only the wrath of God, but under a view of God that sees you as something other than his son or daughter, if in fact you have come to him and are a child of God. And I bump into this all the time, and I'm going to park this, and I'm going to come back to it, and I'll be done here in just a second. When we are trying to get our way in a conversation, in a business relationship, in fact, you just saw in their debates, it's very easy to pull out a known mistake that someone else made and stick them with it, right? I mean, it can be very effective in trying to maneuver and get your way. Self-forgiveness is different. Self-forgiveness means that you are the accuser of yourself. And what the Father wants you to understand is what is available is a louder voice than your own self-condemnation. It's very possible for you to get here and enjoy the freedom that comes with a new standing. And that is where we are. And number 4, self-direction. When you realize as a believer that you have been released from what once held you in bondage, and you have a new standing, you have a risen nature, you are a child of God, there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. Then what needs to happen is your self-talk. And I think that's a great deal of depression, self-pity, self-harm, self-doubt. Almost all of that is rooted in a vision of self that is not developed. I'm not asking you to ignore the mistakes you've made. If you've made them, they do need to be reckoned with. You might need to even do some reconciliation with somebody that you have harmed. But in the area of self-forgiveness starts with a new vision of who you are. As long as you keep seeing yourself as a failure and a loser and a hell-bound sinner, which you may or may not be, I don't know. But if that vision doesn't change, then the self-talk doesn't change. But once the reality of what God has said about you, what the Lord himself has said about you, when that becomes a reality in your thinking, your self-concept changes, and you no longer see yourself or listen to yourself in the voices from the past. Seriously, what should be the louder voice in your life? Okay, now just think about this. What should be the loudest, more profound voice in your life? The voice of yourself speaking in the past over what you did in the past, or the voice of the Lord saying there's no condemnation? You got it? Because your ability to concentrate on that thought will revolutionize. Hi, Randy, and hi, Kevin. That will revolutionize your thinking. 4, self-direction begins with a new self-concept that is not self-generated, but generated by God himself. There is no condemnation. If you are a believer, you are a risen one. You are a child of God, and he no longer speaks to you or treats you as though you are far from him. And that immediately changes the mindset. I'm a real believer that mindsets change habit. If you change the mind, you can change the habits. So it may be, and this is where it gets a little sticky, if you are around people who are negative, and I'm not real eager to have you push them away, but if your environment is critical, it's not affirming, it isn't helping you isolate who God made when he made you, it will deeply affect your self-direction. And I would encourage you to think about that. Sometimes people have friends because it's the ones that they're used to, but are they good for you? Are they helping you? Are they encouraging you? Are the people that you know investing in you? And are you investing in them? In fact, do you have relationships that actually help you bond? Or are your relationships separating you from yourself? So I want to encourage you as we close here, the whole business of self-awareness, and I apologize for the redundancy because I think some of you may have just started listening. Self-awareness requires 4 things. It requires self-awareness, that you recognize the thing that you have done or the thing that you are doing, and so that it's specific. You understand what it is so that you can deal with it. 2, it requires you to be self-reflective so you get to the why am I saying that, doing that, thinking that, feeling that. 3, self-forgiveness begins to turn into a very positive experience when you discover true self-identity, that you do not spend your time accusing yourself and defining yourself by your mistakes, but you define yourself as a child of God, and even if you're not a Christian here, just stay with me. Even if you're not a Christian, you are a created being, and you were not meant to live in self-doubt and self-fear. You were not meant for that. I'd like to win you to the Lord, and that's where I'd like to bring you with this conversation. But even if you're unchurched or you're an atheist, I still think there's hope for you and getting closer to your self-identity. Who did God make you to be? And with that comes the power to change your habits. And I'm not necessarily talking about eating, drinking, smoking or not. I'm talking the way that you think, your perception of what your life is all about. If you change your thought patterns, I believe you can change your emotionality. And in doing so, you grow a strength. You grow character that's greater than your weakness. Now, I'm going to stop here, and just a second, I'm going to give you one thing in closing. Self-forgiveness is not just a one-time event. It's a mode of living. It's not just that I realize I have been forgiven. And this is what's so deeply profound about the forgiveness that the Lord offers. Not only do I say, okay, I understand that God has forgiven whatever it was I did in the past. Self-forgiveness, when you really deeply embrace this, you understand that you are being forgiven and that you will be forgiven. That almost sounds like a reckless license to do whatever you want to do. Hey, I can do whatever I want. But not really if you embrace it. Because the thought of self-forgiveness doesn't start with me. It's predicated on God's forgiveness, and I am embracing the fact that I have been forgiven myself. And if God has forgiven me, why should I hold myself hostage to my former actions or my past mistakes? Well, I shouldn't. I know that they have hurt. I got a burn right here from 40 years ago. It's still a scar. I still carry some scars from years ago. You may carry some emotional scars. But you can get beyond those when you grow an identity that's much deeper and richer and has much more reason for it than your emotions about the past. So think about this. Grow a strength that's greater than your weakness. Learn to do that over time. Don't see that the one time that you've made a mistake becomes the time you always make that same mistake. I believe that the Christian life, and I believe life itself, needs practice. And I think we give up too early because we didn't overcome something in the first month or two. We feel like we never will. But I think that you do, not to quote the movie too much, but I do think there's incremental steps. I think you make progress like you do anything else in life. When you learn to read, ride a bike, whatever it is that you have done wrong doesn't mean you're sentenced to that. Now, I'm going to stop here. I have enjoyed the time together. If you have any thoughts, hey, Steve, what's up? I hope you're still playing that guitar. Probably better than me. Hey, Bonnie, hope things are doing well. I would encourage you to do two things. Look at the first video from yesterday. I think it's about 22 minutes, and I have no idea what the time is on this one. On forgiveness, because I try to do a really good job of defining what forgiveness is and how it works, and the wonderful relief in understanding that your mission in life is to be the forgiving agent, just like Joseph to his brothers, just like Jesus to the world. Forgiveness recreates relationship. Tonight I wanted to talk about self-forgiveness, because self-forgiveness recreates your relationship to yourself. That's why you are in such turmoil, is you haven't maybe not let God recreate your relationship to yourself. And you do that by self-awareness, self-reflection, true self-identity, and a new self-direction where you see yourself overcoming. So I hope all this is helpful. I might do some other live feeds, but I don't want to wear this out. Maybe this is a little bit gone a long way. My name is Larry Douglas, and I'll tell you what I'll do. You can find me, you can message me. My email is preacherman23@gmail.com. I don't even care if you text me. I'll buy you a cup of coffee. 724-802-0224. 724-802-0224. I'd rather have you text me. We'll do coffee. If you are struggling, I don't want you to struggle alone. And if I don't have the answers, maybe I can find someone who will. So I pray the best of the Lord's blessings on you. I do. I pray the best of the Lord's blessings on you. Hope you have a great night and a great upcoming weekend. Talk to you later.